All right, guys, welcome to the Outrun Show. We are launching a cool little mini series on being a good student. And we're going to address topics like how to approach class, how to approach learning, how to approach failure, how to have the best attitude as a student, and then our personal tips and advice on how to really what, being the goal of a student is, and that is learn really well, quickly, in the most fulfilling way. So, stick with us. These are going to be awesome.
And to learn to do other things good too.
To do other things good too.
All right, I'm going to mess this up, and I'm here to be corrected.
So, were you talking about like inhibition?
No. Inhibition? No.
That always reminds me of that one song. That word inhibition always reminds me of that. What's that song? There's one line in that song.
Yeah.
Anyways, segue.
There.
Because I feel like,
but no, you're talking about like changing hats, right? Like,
I think it's skin. Is it skin?
Like,
go ahead, Justin.
when you're going into the classroom
song.
or you're going into the learning environment, like changing your hats, right?
Yeah.
Is like the easiest way to explain it. It's just like, oh, I'm working on my car, so I'm putting on my car mechanic hat, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking about, right? And most people come to class or some sort of educational content, and they're just like, I'm here to be me, rather than I'm here to be a different version of me that's better able to learn and absorb this information.
Yeah, because that's what all school has been for your whole life, is like trying to figure out who you are amongst your peers and who you are, within this social structure of your class. But if you want to be a good student, I don't feel like it's the right time is to express who you are and find out who you are. It's just, you're here to learn and find out what your mistakes are and fix them and get mentorship.
The persona of student is something that, or student acumen is what I would like to say, is something that I think is critical. Any serious person who's living like a seriously examined life is trying to curate. And if you're a kid, that's hard. It kind of happens on you. You just happen to have been in enough environments where you understood structure and the right time to ask questions and be interested and curious, or you're just naturally passionate about what you're doing and you're lucky, or that's something that you kind of have to learn. I'm pretty sure I was a pretty terrible student up to a certain age. I think just finding subjects that I was passionate in, and then also finding and then going through some more strict environments just once or twice. I don't think it needs to always be like that, but I feel like if you haven't learned in a relatively strict environment where there was a strict teacher or coach or instructor, you haven't sort of understood how to operate with that level of structure, it's good for you to experience it for a little bit. So
yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like school, at least in America, is already a bit structured like that. Like I don't it's definitely not very laissez-faire. I mean, we can talk all we want about like whether we agree with the education system, right? And everybody's complain about something, but it's done a remarkable job of educating some 500 million people over the past 50 years or whatever, so that's pretty impressive. But it's like, it is very regimented, right? So I think that's what Justin was saying, is like if you're still in high school, then yeah, you're kind of like in this self-discovery. But for most of us adults that have come out and had some upper education as well, like it's very much like you've gone through this process of like attending class to figure out who you are, rather than attending class to learn the content, right? You're just like, this is just the thing that I have to do, just like work. I just show up and then I do the work, and then like, right, rather than going in intentional. So I think for most people, they maybe want to find a teacher that knows how to have a more relaxed environment where they can turn on that, like, I'm a student hat now.
Yeah.
Because they've never had that opportunity, right? They've never actually like been given like, okay, cool, here's the educational content. Like, it's up to you to like absorb and learn this. Some classes, I guess, in college are like that, but
yeah, I mean, the opportunity there, it's just almost impossible to recognize it and take the step to be focused on being a student when you're a kid. like there's just no way that competing against peer pressure and social, acceptance is gonna take a backseat to I'm gonna learn how to be a good student and accept mentorship. So
it's very difficult
yeah.
too. Yeah. And then as an adult, you get in a workplace, and it's, if you have like a work mentor, that mentor is like assigned to you, right? Like that person's either your boss, or he or she's from another department, and they're like assigned to like, do professional mentorship. And so even then it's like, it's very regimented and strict. And it's not like you can be entirely open and honest when it's somebody who's your superior in a workplace. So yeah, I don't know. That's that. I wouldn't say like go out and find a strict instructor, but.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. There's maybe two main modalities that seem to be common, and that is the structure of a classroom setting and then independent like learner. And I think what's funny is you go through all your entire K through 12 experience, and you're in a classroom structure. Like the chances that you're asked to be independently responsible for the organization of yourself and learning is less necessary, because it's hard to groom herds of people in that manner. So that's sort of the efficacy of the sort of group structure that sometimes gets critiqued as being dated and built to put people in factories and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I completely agree with that, the way people assess that, but there's a benefit of that. And then, ironically, then when you start college, it's the inverse in a lot of ways. You come out of K through 12, and then you're responsible for organizing yourself independently, and you're expected to be able to navigate and chart those waters. And there's sort of like an opportunity there for you to either flourish as an independent learner, or an opportunity to get sort of to continue to get stuck in academia and sucked into just sitting in degrees and sort of drifting, right, as an adult. That's that kind of like crossroad there. I was definitely a person who flourished and began flourishing in high school as an independent learner, and so I can speak more to that than navigating the navigating academia for back. I was going to make a Doom reference. What are those like different levels of catacombs or something like that? Anyway, it's kind of dark, but
isn't Doom like the levels of hell?
Yeah,
I think the original Doom was you're descending into hell.
Right. So I think academia is analogous to wandering through, at least
Doom Eternal's on Earth.
Right. Exactly. So what I think is important is, if you're going to be an independent learner, which is I think what our society is right now, people will experience more success with than the traditional, because just things take so much time right now, or things move really fast right now, and you don't have as much time to sort of sit through long degrees to figure out how you'll apply the knowledge that you're acquiring in that, right? You need faster testing environments, mostly because just the world is moving faster because of technology right now. You can't sit and wait 4 years to figure out if what you're studying is really going to help you with what you want to do. So I would say early testing. Some of the characteristics of students that are things I've benefited from and that I enjoy working with is students who are able to take a concept, test it, and then bring it back. Now, if you're in a class or you're learning from me or from any teacher, I think it's super important that you are not just, and I use this word a lot because I feel I use it to describe audience. I use it to describe when someone is passively engaged in something. So I'd rather people just not be audience to the instruction. I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls of academia.
What does that look like?
Yeah, so like if you go into one of those like lecture halls where someone's teaching and it's like 150 students and one teacher, and you're not at all, it's very easy to not be engaged with what's being said, to just watch it like a Netflix series, where if at any moment someone was like, hey, what did the teacher just say? You'd be like, what? Yeah, no, I heard it, but I didn't hear it. Like you're listening, but you're not thinking through and engaged in the topic. So if a teacher is trying to convey a concept, I'm usually trying to absorb that concept and then immediately apply it somehow, even if it just is in academic theory. And the next step is trying to take that out and use it in any sort of meaningful way, right? So if we're talking about, I'm going to come in class and we just spent, we just spent entire 3 lessons or something like that talking about precision jumps, and then I don't try to implement that sort of independently and on my own in some way, then I feel like you're probably not going to absorb it. And that's just an indicator of a really dedicated student. Will be, even in class, they're like trying it, they're trying to work through it, they're trying to do it. And if they take it outside of class and do something with it, that's even better. That's a key characteristic. You did what you studied somewhere else as part of a test.
Application.
Right, application. You applied it somehow.
Definitely part of the student hat, right? Is like taking information and applying. For sure. And
so when I say audience, I mean they come, like someone may be tempted to come in and think they will just absorb it just having been there. Now there is some value of osmosis. Like sometimes your level does go up just being around people better than you. Have you ever had that happen? Where you've just gotten better because you're training around people who are. I believe this is a very powerful thing in learning. Like there's not necessarily a standard, but we know that when you put people around people who are better than they typically tend to.
You talking about like parkour inflation?
Is that what that is? Parkour inflation?
Or like where somebody unlocks a skill and then suddenly everybody else just kind of.
Yes, and that happens, in other places, like when you break speed records, or like right now there's a lot of videos floating around of people doing level 5 climb ups, things like that. They're like, oh, now I've got this, and it's just one person gets it, and then it's all of a sudden you see everybody else getting it. We see that in like. Talent Code or whatever book I think talked about that as well.
Yeah, call it parkour inflation.
Parkour inflation.
It's also incentive to like not suck. Yeah. So if you're like, oh yeah, like 10 years ago I was able to do like a backflip, and that was pretty rare for like a parkour person, or at least it was like, a moderately high level skill. Now it's like, dude, that's entry level.
Yeah.
You gotta be able to do a backflip.
It does feel like
that's entry level. Sorry, like, now you have to be able to do like, a basic tricking combo. You'll be able to do like scoot, cork. Mm-hmm. Ideally, it's double cork, but hey,
yeah,
you gotta keep up with inflation.
Yeah, that's if you're taking I would put that in kind of like the sport or upper limits of like human ability category of if that's the realm you're trying to compete in.
Yeah,
I feel like you got to have that, and that gets harder and harder. I remember when we first started training together, guys. Like it was like 2013. We've been training for a couple of years, but it was like 2013, and I had seen a couple of other disciplines I've been in. I'd watched that like that baseline for being viewed as as good as sort of at the upper echelon, the upper 90th percentile raise. And I remember looking around and being like, oh my gosh, people are going to get really good at this. No one has really been doing this for that long, and we've got about 3 years, 2 years before it's just impossible for an average athlete to come in and be good at this, right? And I feel like that's happened. Although what's really interesting about that is that I feel like a lot of stuff it is really hard to be good at goes typically unnoticed. Like you get flashier stuff that's recognized as being like talented, I think, still using your backflip analogy. But some of the more like techie skill stuff, like complicated strides or precisions or intricate climbing techniques, just don't even go.
I think they go unnoticed on like Instagram, right? Mm-hmm. There are definitely a lot of people that I watch on social media or through video that I see the moves, and I know that like their highlight clips are the like crazy flashy things, but when I'm watching them do strides, I'm like, oh yeah, I know if I were training with this person, they'd be hitting warm-up strides that I'd have to be warmed up and going for.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think some of that, it's like it goes unnoticed except for when they're seen in person, and you're like, whoa, that was the stride
in person. Yeah,
like when you see people
jumping
train at like the IMAX, right? Like on clips, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen people calling pretty the IMAX. That's pretty cool, right? Until you get to the IMAX and you're like, wow, oh,
really
right?
Big.
That's big.
Yeah.
So I think there's that, but
I think free running has a little bit more room to grow crazier flips. There's just too many variations that are possible right now. But with parkour and jumping, I mean, I remember people doing 8-foot strides on rails for the first time back in like 2008 or 9 or something like that. 8-foot rail strides. That was, and that's still ridiculously impressive to see that in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
legit, not just like the
stepping,
right? But like
not stepping, but
boom,
striding.
Boom.
Yeah, that and those people had those quite a bit. So, or a while ago.
So what I want to say about coming in as a student, you're going to see that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to see people who were very, very, very good and you don't know where their baseline was when they started, and you don't know what they've been through to get there. So humility is one of the biggest aspects of coming in and being a new student. You have to be able to maintain your self-confidence and self-esteem. I'll say maintain some degree of self-esteem, while in parallel to that, also being highly humble. And what that means is just trying not to take what you observe and your place in it personally, because there's almost the opposite side of the ego that is super cocky about stuff, and that is the ego that is super self-deprecating, right? That's still your own judgment against yourself, whether you think you're super good or you think you're super bad. It's two sides of the same coin, being a distraction to your progress. So when you enter into the space of training and learning in any domain, you should come in as a student, and a student is first and foremost humble, and ideally, I think on the student's side, because if you're humble, you also don't want to be, for lack of a better term, a sucker, right? So you want to make sure that you also have some degree of a feeling of self-confidence to some degree, right? It's very hard to maintain that, but you need to work on both humility and satisfaction with the self. That doesn't mean you can't have ambition, but just satisfaction with the self, right? Otherwise, you're because I love that. When I see that in someone, in any domain, I'm just like, ooh, so much respect for that. This person can be humble, but they also seem to still have a degree of self-confidence that lays a better landscape for them to learn. Because if you're constantly judging yourself, then that's not going to help you either. You'll be second guessing everything from balance to jumping to memory to the way you present. Humility plus self-confidence.
Yeah, overly
It's
critical students definitely have a hard time progressing forward, right? Or they have a hard time. I guess they don't have a hard time progressing forward. They have a hard time maintaining the same pace of learning, right? Somebody who's overly critical over themselves will find something that they're really good at, and they'll hit a rapid expansion, and then they'll find something they struggle with, and they'll beat themselves up so much about it that they don't progress at all, because they're so stuck up here, right, in this self-image, rather than just being it's okay, you suck at this, just go do the work, right, rather than beating yourself up because you suck at this. And so they have this progress tree that looks very erratic, rather than this nice steady progression that we want to see from students, an even progression. And your super humble students, I feel will have a more even pace, but they won't have this, if they don't have this self-confidence, right? They're sycophantic almost, right? The coach is all right, now touch your ear. And they're, all right, now touch your nose. And they touch your nose, and then they don't ever be wait, why am I doing this? Is this actually helping me get where I want to go? Right? They just follow it. We'll have a progression, but it'll be very horizontal, right? It's very even pace, but it's rather than seeing this
Yep. Yeah, I think if you are constantly disappointed by your progress in individual classes and every day, I think you're focusing on too big of milestones and too big of steps.
That's very reasonable.
Right? You're trying to take 5 steps at a time, and then when you get 4, you're just completely unsatisfied about it. But you still took a step. You're just not realizing, you're not identifying the progress that you've made. So someone who has a very granular vision of their slope is going to be excited when they just take the rise of one by one, right?
Yeah.
Instead of this 5, up. And so I think filling in those gaps helps you be satisfied with small progress.
Yeah. And I was just say the inverse, because you're saying you need a mixture of both, right?
Right.
You need a mixture of humility, but you also do need a mixture of, I don't want to say self-criticism, but maybe self-awareness that hey, I just progressed. That's super important, right? I took what I learned, which is a humility thing. I was open and accepting to giving feedback, or to getting feedback and getting tips, and then I applied them, which is some self-critique, right? And then I took that feedback loop again, right? But the super humble student waits for the coach to be hey, did you notice you just did that? And they're oh, hey, now I can celebrate, right? The coach recognized. And that's, I think, a negative too. That one's certainly more rare than the alternative.
I think some mitigation of judgment, self-judgment, I think is comfort in being able to take and receive and handle feedback. I think this is something that people mock on social media about millennials or whatever, but I just think it's any like younger age group. And then also as you get older, if you hold on to that, it really becomes too narrow of a focus of judgment. And it's hard to let go of that self-judgment and self-critique, especially if you've just been like watching an hour of like, YouTube videos of people doing the things you want to do. And then you step in and you're like, oh yeah, maybe your appetite, your training eyes were too big for your training stomach. And you need to like focus on one thing instead of focus on judging every one thing. And the best way to approach that, and it was funny, is that this characteristic tends to follow people all the way through the ascension of their training. So it isn't just new people who are like hyper judgmental about every little like nuance of their movement. It tends to go, in my observation, all the way up the skills ladder. And then you see higher level athletes or people with a lot of skill being really dissatisfied with pretty amazing skill.
Yeah.
And it's also maybe even sometimes disrespectful to go and be so dissatisfied in front of a bunch of other people when
who worked really hard to get halfway where you are.
Right. So that's
a huge thing. And I think it's important to point that out, is that when you are being dissatisfied with your own progress and you're the best one in the class, it ruins everybody's view of their own expression and skill. So that you got to be really careful with that. I think that, and you lead the class whether you want to or not with that behavior, because it's very hard to watch someone jump 2 feet further than you or Kong easier, and then to watch you complain about that, and then to do it worse than them right afterwards, right?
Yeah. So, I also had this experience just last week. I was looking at like attack because we were having a class and I saw the opportunity for a move, which was like a attack and then like a 180. I mean, maybe it was even just 180 like cat down on the floor, and like it only took a minute for like capable parkour vultures to spot what I was working on and then be like, I'm just gonna flash that in front of him, right? Yes. And then it was just a line of all of our athletes, who are really good, like. They just literally, I mean, and Evan's the camera. So they just put down the camera guy puts down the camera and does it in front of me. So it's like the person filming the attempts is just like, I'm just gonna hit this real quick. All right. Yep. I was curious. Good. Carry on. Yeah. And there's various reasons for why that works and doesn't work in the moment. But I think acknowledging baseline is super important, right? And that's where you have to come in. So there's several ways to measure progress. And if you're trying to frame up your self-critique about whether you're progressing or achieving what you want to or not, one thing is don't have a super narrow focus. I won't say don't. It's dangerous to have a super narrow focus of your training because the risk of you being disappointed in yourself is much higher. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is just to acknowledge how you're trying to measure progress. And if that is based off of a baseline that you're judging your original baseline against people who came in at a different baseline of ability, that's going to be really tough. Right. So is your baseline that you're judging against, or here's where I came in, and then I'm looking at the global view of parkour, which is very hard to understand, even especially in video. Most things are much bigger than what they actually look like, right? So when you go and approach them in real life, or if you stand up on a mezzanine and look down at the parkour, like the Outrun Stadium, right? Looking down at like the base, everything looks smaller. It's like when you go to a basketball or football game, and then you get down to the turf and you look at the size of the athletes. You go, oh my gosh, these guys can jump. Like up there, I thought we did. Wow, we're not even the same species.
You see a line of 12 6'5" men. Yeah,
that's right. And then to feel it,
and then be like, I understand why he didn't just run straight out. I get it now. Yes, so, parkour is very similar to that.
So baseline, how do you guys think baseline should be measured? Is it good enough to just say, here's where I started and here's where I am and feel good about that? Or should you measure yourself against peers? Or I'm asking this, do you measure yourself against peers? Where do you put your baseline? Peers. Okay. Against peers. If you measure yourself against peers, is badass too. If you can do that, I'm impressed.
My baseline is always, did I do the move without getting injured or risking injury, in a way that I can tell. Like sometimes I'll do a move and I won't get hurt, but I know I got close to landing incorrectly, and I know if I'll do it, a number of times. So my baseline is always, did I do the move in a way that I know I can repeat it and enjoy it multiple times in a row? First baseline, right? So, and then after that comes certain, aesthetic baselines. I feel like
when you watch the clip, like
when I watch it afterwards. So I'm always filming and training at the same time. If I look back on it, am I gonna enjoy watching myself do it? But then, in comparing it to other people, it's really tough. Now right now I don't compare myself to other people almost at all. I feel like it's just my own video and what I expect myself. But that has taken 15 or so many years of making my own videos and comparing them to other people, where I can finally pull back on that lever and just enjoy my movement as myself. But the first journey of parkour has always been to up the other person on a video.
Yep. I think real quick, I want to say it took 15 years to get to that place. And I feel like age probably has something to do with that, right? Not just training for 15 years until you stop caring about what other people think. I think there's something to be said for the cycle in life, in where you are in age and where you are in status with your peers and where you perceive yourself to be athletically in comparison to others. And the big factor in that, I think, is the could-be's. Getting a case of the could-be's is one of the hardest things to endure as someone who's coming into a discipline. And what I mean by that is what could be. When it was easier for me with parkour because I came into parkour formally training in my 29, 30. Okay. So everybody else was younger almost. And there were a few people who weren't, and they were just happy to see someone else who had the mindset and baseline physical ability to just play the game.
Yep.
And so the could-be's were almost non-existent. I was already an anomaly, so the self-confidence aspect wasn't as hard.
Yep.
But when I started training wushu and I was in my late teens, there was a lot of, I could be a pro athlete at this, right? Yeah. And so I feel like when people are discovering themselves and coming in and they're like, you know what, I'm in late teens, I'm doing parkour, I see a bunch of people around me like breaking these barriers, I could be the best. And the could be, I think, is a very dangerous little ego demon that kind of like slides in there. Do you guys feel like you have any could-be's, or is that really what changed? Or is it just
like right now, like I could be, tomorrow I could be if I trained hard enough?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, not necessarily tomorrow, but
yeah.
Ooh, okay, so there's a little could-be. Like could-be's are cool.
That's ambition. Everybody needs a little bit of ambition.
Yeah.
There's the becoming, right? And then there's
like could-be's are not like physical power and that stuff. I know my like limits on that.
Really? Justin is very zen about his athletic performance.
My could-be's are on other things that definitely don't require me to exert maximum effort on things with my muscles. Like the designing of this gym, like right now my biggest could-be is like I need to make this gym the best that it could be.
Right.
I can't mess up on that. I'm making it out of metal. It's welded together with lightning.
There's no going back.
The could-be, it definitely has to be for me in terms of the gym design. So that's where I feel like most of my efforts are. But yeah, in terms of physical expression, could-be is definitely more towards the style, where I feel like I just want like some general like appreciation or encouragement from the people around me on my movement. I'm not looking for a global approval for movements or
you're not looking for approval, you're looking for support.
Support. There's
right?
another word.
People will be like, hey, that was awesome.
But it's a little more pinpoint. But yeah, I'm definitely not looking to upstage anybody on a global scale.
Appreciation, maybe? General appreciation?
Yeah, I don't know why it's not coming to me right now.
Okay, well, think about it.
Pops up too.
Because I know the feeling. Like, it's not recognition. It's just like, and it's not admiration, but it's like if you make dinner and it tastes good, like, you kind of want to know.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like, oh yeah, if you killed that dish.
That doesn't mean I want you to be like, oh man, I could never make a dish like this. You're
right.
so good at cooking dishes. Like, you just want to know, like, hey, this is really good. Thank you.
I also don't want I don't want to make a better like cake than you or something, or stir fry. Like, but if I kill it, I want to know like, oh yeah, I killed it.
Absolutely.
I also
That's the point.
I like that, and I think so. Finding and experts will talk about this a lot. Who I think are really good coaches is one competence of a coach is finding a way to put people in a peer group where it feels like there is the constant opportunity for success, but that is just on the outside of outside of your abilities, right? When the skills gap is too great, then there's this feeling of demise, and that takes in my opinion, a very, very mature and independent student to still be able to survive in that environment, which is something that I was able to build as a skill when I was younger, which makes it easier for me to get into environments where the skills gap is so great and still be able to learn something. And that is the ability to sort of be thrown into an environment where people are way better than you and still be able to feel comfortable in your skin and play the game. That's the more global game that I would play with others in this at this point in time. Is being able to not fit in, but I describe it as like golf. Like, I won't hold you back, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not good at golf, but we're not talking about like, I'm not going to take 20 swings at this and you're going to be waiting to, that's where I aim to be the majority of time is in sync to some degree with that. So I think the baseline stuff, I think those are good places to start, is like having the self-awareness to be somewhat humble in your approach to training, have a baseline of self-confidence, but also be able to understand, humility in the moment, and then realizing what's your baseline, and what are you measuring against too. I think the baseline is really important, understanding where you came in and then where you got. And I think those are my two big ones.
Yeah, no, I really like those. I think to summarize just this kind of first little talk about a good student, it is coming in with the humility of accepting that like what you see as the global baseline is not where you are, and it may take you a long time to get there, right? Because nobody watches, like, to use a football example, nobody watches football and then is like, I'm gonna go play football. Or like kids actually do this. Mm-hmm. There's that slow-mo, that kid playing baseball, right? They watch a professional sport and then they go play and they're like, oh, I gotta be the best. I gotta be like those guys I see on TV. And eventually as they grow up, they realize that takes a very, very long time to get there, right? And so as a student, you need to come in with a humility that's like, I'm not there yet, but you need to have the self-confidence and the ambition to be like, but I'm gonna do my best application to get there, if that's my goal.
To endure.
To get there, right? And there's a fine line, because if you're too far on the ambition side and you're like, I need to get to professional level as fast as possible, and you're not humble enough to accept the coach who's like, stop it, you're gonna break yourself, then you break yourself, right? And on the inverse, if you're so humble that you're like, oh, those people are so amazing, those people are so cool, I'll never be like those people because they're just so far ahead of me, right? Then you never end up progressing fast enough to ever get close to that, right? So there is that fine line between like humility and ambition is kind of how I would frame it up, that like you need to have.
Yeah, and during that process, no endurance then.
So you have any summation that you want to add to?
Yeah, I think you're just going to have the best time being a student if you can identify the smallest steps that you're taking as progressions and as moving forward, and don't get too caught up on taking giant leaps every time you come into class.
Progression. Growth by, or moving forward by an inch. It's just as good as moving forward by a foot sometimes, right? And like, as long as you're moving forward, it's cool.
Yeah. It's just hard to identify sometimes those small steps.
Well, I think that's where the coach should come in.
Yeah,
right? Sometimes if a student finishes a class and you're like, hey man, how was class? And they're like, it was all right. And you're like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, I feel like I didn't really, progress much. It's the coach's job to be like, what are you talking about? Last week you couldn't hit this, or last time we did this skill, like you were struggling the whole time, and this time I didn't even have to come by and like give you any progressions. You were working on, right? So that's where the coach comes in to help you identify those like small markers. That's a sign of a good coach too. But yeah, as a student, you need to be looking out for those things too, right? And celebrating those to yourself,
right?
Or one last thing before, which maybe we can talk about next time, is like how to be a good student for your peers, right? Because maybe the coach isn't around and doesn't identify that, but if I'm in a class with somebody else and I notice they've done that, I want to go out of my way to be like, yo, Travis, that was awesome, dude. Like, I know you've been working hard on that skill and you got, like that was much easier for you today. Or, and celebrating those successes with your peer group as well matters. So part of being a good student is being a good peer group, Cool.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah. Quips, not tips.
Tips, not quips.
No, I don't want them to give him tips. Like I'd much rather, like it'd be great.
You don't want quips either, though. That's kind of demeaning.
Are there quips demeaning? I thought it was
like witty.
Quips are like
really cutting. All right,
Yeah.
It's too close to my heart then.
But tips don't need to be like educational. Sometimes tips are just like, good job.
I want to talk about that one next
maybe like
one.
a tip, like a payment tip, like you might give to like hey, good job. Here's a tip.
There you go.
That's that kind of tip.
Yeah, and like if someone came in and it was like, hey,
different English
bro, your cat hangs are really good today. Here's $5 to coffee.
Yeah.
I'd be like, that's amazing.
That's a great tip.
It's the best peer ever. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode. I can close if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so stay tuned for more sort of like useful heuristics and understanding of how to approach being a student the best in our short little student series here. And you can find us on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts, or watch our interesting faces and looks on YouTube. Thanks for joining the Outrun Show, and we'll catch you next time.
That was for the video only people.
Get the special bonus material.